The morning had barely begun when I realized I was making mistakes I would normally never make. A patient handed me his appointment card, and instead of directing him to the cardiology department, I almost sent him to radiology. He smiled politely when I corrected myself, but the embarrassed look on my face probably explained more than my apology did. Working at the clinic had taught me to stay calm during emergencies, yet lately my thoughts kept drifting somewhere they should not. Just before 10 o'clock, an elderly woman approached the reception desk holding a letter from her doctor. She admitted that the medical words confused her, so I read the letter with her and explained each sentence using simpler English. By the time we reached the last paragraph, the worry had disappeared from her face. She thanked me several times before leaving, and I caught myself wondering why I could make frightening news easier for complete strangers while making my own truth more complicated every single day. As soon as the waiting room became quiet again, my phone vibrated inside the drawer beneath the reception desk. I expected another reminder from Mia, but the message came from a number I had never seen before. It contained only one sentence. "He deserves to hear it from you." There was no greeting, no signature, and no explanation. I read the words twice before locking my phone, but they stayed with me long after the screen had gone dark. Whoever had written them clearly knew something about my life, and that thought unsettled me far more than the message itself. The rest of the morning passed in the usual rhythm of phone calls, appointment changes, and worried families asking for directions. I answered every question with the same calm voice I always used, although more than once I caught myself checking the drawer to see whether another message had arrived. Habits often grow quietly without asking for permission, and mine had become so obvious that even Daniel, one of the nurses, noticed. "You've looked at that phone more than the appointment schedule today," he said with a grin as he placed another stack of files on my desk. "Either someone's planning you a surprise, or you're waiting for news that can't wait until lunch." I laughed because it was easier than explaining the truth. "Nothing exciting, just a few messages." Daniel shrugged and walked away, already distracted by another patient calling his name. His comment lasted only a few seconds, but it stayed with me because it reminded me how easily people notice changes we believe we have hidden. When my shift ended, I walked slowly across the parking lot while the first drops of rain began falling onto the pavement. I sat inside my car for several minutes before starting the engine, hoping the silence would settle my thoughts. Instead, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Mia. "Can you call me before you go home?" I stared at the message without replying. Mia had been my closest friend since university, and during the last 6 months, she had become the only person who knew why I sometimes left work looking more exhausted than when I had arrived. She had never pushed me without a reason, but she had stopped accepting my excuses a long time ago. By the time I reached home, the rain had become much heavier. Noah was standing in the kitchen with one sleeve rolled up, trying to repair a cabinet door that refused to close properly. Several screws lay scattered across the counter beside him, and judging by the expression on his face, the cabinet was winning the argument. "You picked a good day to come home," he said without looking up. "I'm officially losing a fight against kitchen furniture." I smiled as I placed my bag beside the stairs. "Maybe the cabinet is trying to tell you it's time to buy a new one." "No," he replied, shaking his head. "It's trying to tell me I should have paid someone who actually knows what they're doing." I laughed and picked up one of the loose screws that had rolled onto the floor. Moments like that had always been my favorite part of our marriage, because neither of us needed to try very hard. Ordinary conversations came naturally, and even small problems somehow became lighter when we faced them together. While Noah finished repairing the cabinet, I washed vegetables for dinner and listened to him complain about a client who could never make up his mind. Halfway through the story, he stopped speaking and looked at me more carefully. "You're not listening." "I am." "You just put the tomatoes in the fridge instead of the salad bowl." I looked down and realized he was right. We both laughed, but the laughter faded much faster than it usually did. "You've been distracted a lot lately," he said, wiping his hands with a kitchen towel. "Is work getting worse?" The question was simple. The answer should have been simple too. Instead, I looked away and reached for another tomato. "We're just busy." He did not argue, but he did not look convinced either. Busy doesn't usually make you forget where vegetables belong. His voice was not angry. It was tired. That small difference made the lie sitting in my throat feel even heavier. After dinner, Noah carried the plates to the sink while I stayed at the table pretending to read the news on my phone. The unknown message was still there, waiting silently beneath Mia's unread text. I almost deleted both of them, but something stopped me. They felt less like messages now and more like a countdown I could not see. "I'll be in the garage for a while," Noah called from the hallway. "I'm looking for the warranty papers for the washing machine." "I think they're somewhere in our bedroom." My heart skipped. Our bedroom? Yeah, probably in one of the drawers. I looked toward the stairs without saying anything. The brown envelope was still inside the top drawer of my bedside table, hidden beneath a folded sweater. It had remained there for nearly 6 months, beside a document that carried my signature on every page except one. The last page. The one that still waited for a single signature beneath 2 words printed in bold letters: surgery consent. Noah had no reason to look inside that envelope. But for the first time since I had hidden it, I realized I could no longer be certain that he wouldn't. Before I share the rest of the story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. I climbed the stairs before Noah reached the bedroom, trying not to make it obvious that I was in a hurry. The bedside drawer was exactly as I had left it, and the brown envelope was still hidden beneath the folded sweater. I picked it up, hesitated for a moment, then carried it to the wardrobe and slipped it inside an old storage box filled with winter scarves. By the time Noah walked into the room, I was standing beside the bed folding laundry, hoping my heartbeat would slow before he noticed anything unusual. "I'm starting to think those warranty papers never existed," he said with a tired smile as he opened another drawer. "If I don't find them tonight, I'm buying a new washing machine just to avoid looking any longer." "You've searched this room 3 times already," I replied. "Maybe they're in the study." "You said that yesterday." "I was hoping it would become true today." He laughed quietly, but the conversation ended there. A few minutes later, he found the papers inside an old folder in the hallway cabinet, exactly where neither of us had expected them to be. It was such a small thing, yet I caught myself feeling relieved over something completely unrelated to the reason I had rushed upstairs in the first place. The next morning, I arrived at the clinic earlier than usual because I wanted a few quiet minutes before the waiting room filled with patients. Instead, I found Daniel standing at the reception desk with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me and said, "You look like someone who barely slept." I smiled and thanked him, but he studied my face for another second before adding, "You know, people usually work better after asking for help. You don't always have to solve everything alone." His comment surprised me because it sounded so close to the thoughts I had been trying to avoid. I asked whether he was talking about work, and he shrugged with an awkward smile. Mostly work, he said, but sometimes life looks exactly the same from the outside. Before I could ask what he meant, another nurse called his name, leaving me alone with words that felt strangely familiar. The morning became busy almost immediately. Around 11 o'clock, a middle-aged man arrived looking frustrated because he had received 2 appointment letters with different dates. Instead of rushing through the explanation, I asked him to sit down and went through each letter one step at a time until we discovered that one of them had been printed by mistake. He smiled with obvious relief before saying, "It's amazing how one wrong date can make people imagine the worst." I watched him leave and wondered how many fears begin not because something terrible has happened, but because we fill silence with our own imagination. Just before lunch, Mia walked into the clinic carrying a small paper bag from the cafe across the street. She smiled at the receptionist beside me, waited until there were no patients nearby, and then leaned against the counter. "I brought you something before you forgot to eat again. You didn't have to." "I know." She handed me a sandwich, but she didn't let go immediately. "Can you spare 5 minutes?" We stepped outside to a small garden behind the building where staff usually spent their breaks. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, including her new apartment and the endless traffic near her office. I almost believed she had come only to check on me until she reached into her handbag and placed a folded piece of paper on the table between us. "What is this?" I asked. "I found it yesterday." I unfolded the paper and immediately recognized the hospital logo at the top. My hands became still. It wasn't one of my medical reports. It was a reminder letter. Missed appointment. I looked back at Mia. "Where did you get this?" "It was delivered to my apartment." "That's impossible. The hospital printed the wrong apartment number." She lowered her voice. "The envelope had your name on it, so I brought it to you instead of throwing it away." A heavy silence settled between us. "I missed that appointment on purpose," I admitted. "I guessed. I couldn't go." "You could." I looked away. I couldn't walk through those doors again. Mia waited until I met her eyes before speaking. "Elise, are you afraid of the surgery?" I took a slow breath. "No." "Then what are you afraid of?" The answer came out so quietly that I almost didn't hear it myself. "I'm afraid the surgery won't work." For the first time since the conversation began, Mia stopped trying to persuade me. She reached across the table and gently folded the letter before handing it back. "Those are 2 different fears," she said. "One is about an operation. The other is about losing hope." Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, she asked, "Does Noah know you've canceled 2 appointments?" I slowly shook my head. "He doesn't even know there were appointments." She closed her eyes for a brief moment. "Then you're not protecting him anymore." The words hurt because I knew they were true. "I think I'm protecting myself," I admitted. She nodded sadly. "I think you are too." When I returned to the clinic, I found a pink message slip waiting on my desk. "Please call St. Anne's Cardiology Department." My pulse quickened. I picked up the phone immediately, but before I could dial the number, my manager called me into her office to deal with a problem involving next week's schedule. By the time I returned 20 minutes later, the phone at reception was already ringing. I answered automatically. "Good afternoon, Riverside Medical Clinic." The woman on the other end apologized at once. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was calling a private number." "It's all right." There was a short pause. "May I ask who's speaking?" "This is Elise." Another pause. "Oh." The hesitation in her voice instantly caught my attention. I'm calling from State Ann's cardiology department. We were trying to reach your home because we still haven't received confirmation for tomorrow's surgery. Tomorrow? For a second, I couldn't breathe. I whispered, "You called my house?" "Yes," a gentleman answered. But when he said he wasn't expecting any hospital calls, I realized we had made a mistake and ended the conversation immediately. Every sound inside the clinic seemed to disappear. I could hear only my own heartbeat. The woman continued apologizing, but I barely listened. There was only one thought in my mind. Noah had answered the phone. He didn't know the whole truth, but he knew enough to start asking questions. And for the first time in 6 months, I had no idea what I would say when I walked through the front door. The drive home felt longer than it had ever felt before. Every traffic light gave me another excuse to imagine what might be waiting behind the front door. Perhaps Noah had dismissed the hospital's call as a simple mistake. Or perhaps he was sitting at home with questions I could no longer answer with another excuse. By the time I turned into our street, I realized I was no longer afraid of the surgery itself. I was afraid of the conversation I had delayed for so long that it now seemed impossible to begin. The house was unusually quiet when I stepped inside. The television was off, the kitchen lights were on, and the familiar smell of coffee filled the room. Noah was sitting at the dining table with his laptop closed in front of him, but he wasn't working. He looked up as I entered, gave me a small smile, and asked whether I wanted some coffee. His voice sounded normal, almost too normal, which somehow made me even more uncomfortable. "I'll make it," I offered, hoping to delay whatever was coming. "It's already made," he replied. "Sit down for a minute." There was no anger in his voice, but there was something different. He sounded like someone who had spent the entire afternoon thinking instead of speaking. I sat across from him, wrapping both hands around the warm mug he pushed toward me. For almost a minute, neither of us said anything. Noah had never been afraid of silence, but this one felt different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. "This afternoon," he finally said, "someone from a hospital called the house." I nodded slowly. "They asked to confirm tomorrow's surgery." Another nod. "I told them they had the wrong number because I thought they were looking for someone else." He paused before looking directly at me. Were they? The question was simple, and for the first time in months I realized I was too tired to invent another answer. "No." He lowered his eyes for a moment, then looked back at me. "Is it you?" "Yes." He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath, as though he had been preparing himself for an answer he had hoped never to hear. "What's wrong?" I stood, walked upstairs, and returned a minute later carrying the brown envelope. Instead of placing it back in its hiding place, I laid it gently on the table between us. My hands were shaking so much that I struggled to open it, and Noah quietly reached forward to steady the papers before they slipped onto the floor. "I found out 6 months ago," I said. "It started with a routine examination at work. They noticed something unusual and sent me for more tests." He listened without interrupting. "The doctors found a problem with one of my heart valves. They said it could be repaired, but they didn't want me to wait too long." Noah looked down at the medical reports, then back at me. "So tomorrow, they scheduled surgery." "You said scheduled." "I canceled it." He frowned. "You canceled it?" "Twice." The room became completely silent. Not the comfortable silence we sometimes shared while reading or watching television. This silence carried disappointment, fear, and confusion all at once. "Why?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath before answering. Because every appointment made everything feel real. As long as I stayed away from the hospital, I could still pretend my life hadn't changed. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he still didn't understand. "I wasn't afraid of the operation," I continued. "I was afraid they would tell me it hadn't worked. I kept thinking that if I delayed it for another week, maybe I would somehow become brave enough." "You didn't have to become brave by yourself." His words were calm, but they hurt more than if he had shouted, "I know, no." He shook his head gently. "I don't think you do." For the first time since we had started talking, his voice cracked. "I've been wondering for months why you stopped laughing at my terrible jokes. I thought you were tired of me. Then I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. Every evening I watched you drift a little farther away, and I couldn't understand why." Tears filled my eyes. "I never wanted you to think that, but you let me." I lowered my head because there was nothing I could say that would change the truth. After a long silence, Noah picked up one of the appointment letters and looked at the dates. "You canceled 2 surgeries. I told myself I'd book another one. You never did." "I couldn't." He closed the file and pushed it gently aside. "Elise." His voice was quieter now. "I'm not angry because you're ill." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm angry because while I was complaining about deadlines and broken kitchen cabinets, you were sitting alone in hospital waiting rooms, listening to doctors explain your future." That sentence broke something inside me. For 6 months, I had believed I was protecting him from fear. I had never stopped to consider that I was also taking away his chance to stand beside me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I know. I thought I was being strong." "No." He squeezed my hand gently. "You were being lonely." Neither of us spoke again for several moments. Then Noah stood, walked into the kitchen, and returned with the calendar hanging from the wall. He placed it on the table, opened his laptop, and quietly said, "Call the hospital tomorrow morning. Tell them you want the first available date." I looked at him. "What about your work?" He almost smiled. "My work can wait. The surgery might take weeks. So we'll plan for weeks. I'll need someone with me." He looked surprised. "I know." The words came out as a whisper because they carried a meaning far greater than they seemed. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't saying I anymore. I was saying we. The surgery took place 9 days later. Recovery was slower than I had hoped, and there were difficult mornings when even walking across the living room felt exhausting. Noah complained every time I tried to carry something heavier than a coffee cup, and I complained every time he insisted on reading the recovery instructions more carefully than the doctors themselves. Little by little, our ordinary conversations returned, followed by laughter that no longer sounded forced. A few months later, we were standing together in the kitchen when the cabinet door Noah had repaired finally came loose again. He stared at it with the same defeated expression I remembered from that rainy evening and quietly muttered, "I think this cabinet has declared war on me." I laughed so hard that I had to hold the counter for support. He looked at me and smiled. There's the laugh I've been missing. I walked over, held the cabinet steady while he tightened the loose screw, and waited until it finally closed properly. "There," he said with satisfaction. "We fixed it." I looked at the cabinet for a moment before turning back to him. "No," I replied softly. "We fixed something much more important." Sometimes people believe love is measured by the happy days we share together. I learned something different. Love is revealed on the difficult days, when fear makes honesty feel impossible, and someone still chooses to stay beside you anyway. I spent months believing silence would protect the person I loved most, but all it really protected was my fear. The day I finally spoke the truth was not the day our lives became easier. It was the day we finally started facing the future together. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.